The cameras were still rolling live when my cousin Marlo pulled the microphone out of my hand and told 200,000 viewers I'd stolen from the grandmother who raised me. She robbed her blind, Marlo said, smiling right into the lens, then walked away to chase her little TV career. I didn't argue. I didn't even reach for the mic. I just stood there under the studio lights, in front of every family in this county who tuned in that night to thank me for the storm warning that got them out alive, and I let her finish. Because sitting in a shoebox in my closet were 3 years of letters my grandmother had smuggled to me before she died, in handwriting only I would recognize, naming exactly who'd really been draining her accounts. By the end of this broadcast, the woman standing in that spotlight accusing me was going to be the one law enforcement wanted to talk to. But to understand how we got to that stage, you need to go back 3 years, to the day my grandmother first started hiding what was really happening in that house. The first storm I ever read, I was 6 years old, standing barefoot on my grandmother's porch in Haven Ridge, while the whole western sky went the color of a bruise. Opal Wren stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder. She didn't tell me to come inside. She pointed instead, past the tree line, at a low shelf of cloud rolling green at the belly. "See that green under there?" she said. "That's the sky holding hail. You don't run from that. You watch it. You learn its face." I remember the smell of the rain before it landed, cold pennies and cut grass, and the way the porch boards hummed under my feet when the thunder finally came. My parents had been gone 11 months by then. My mother left first, in April, with a man who sold farm equipment 2 counties over. My father followed her ghost out the door that summer and never sent so much as a birthday card. I stopped counting the days he was gone at 400 and something because Opal caught me marking the door frame with a pencil and gently took the pencil away. "We're not going to measure your life by who left," she said. "We're going to measure it by what you can learn." So she taught me the sky. That was her whole religion. Every evening after supper we'd sit on the steps and she'd quiz me. Mare's tails and mackerel scales. The way the swallows dropped low when the pressure fell. She'd make me guess whether it would rain by morning, and then in the morning she'd hold me to it. If I said rain and it stayed dry, she didn't let me shrug it off. "Don't just tell me the answer you want," she'd say. "Tell me what the clouds actually showed you. If you were wrong, find out why you were wrong." I didn't know it then, but that was the whole job I'd end up doing. Now I'm 37, and I read weather for a living, radar, pressure gradients, the raw data, before anyone dresses it up for broadcast. People think my work is standing in front of a green screen pointing at a map. It isn't. My work is not trusting a number until I've traced it back to where it came from. A model tells me one thing. I check it against 3 others and the actual station readings before I put my name on it. I have never once said a storm was safe because someone told me it was. I have to see it myself. Opal built that into me on those porch steps, one wrong guess at a time. My cousin Marlo was there for some of it, and that mattered more than I understood back then. Marlo was 3 years younger, my uncle's girl, and she lived a quarter mile down the same road. She'd come by on her bike and sit on the bottom step while Opal and I did our sky reading, and I could feel her watching us the way you watch a window you're not invited through. One evening Opal called me, my little forecaster, and pressed a warm oatmeal cookie into my hand, and I saw Marlo's face do something quiet and hard. She didn't get a cookie that night. She'd tell you later she remembered everyone she didn't get. "You just live here because nobody else wanted you," she said to me once low, so Opal wouldn't hear. I was 9. I didn't answer. I went inside and watched the rain start against the kitchen window, counting the seconds between the drops the way Opal taught me, until the counting made the sting go away. I should have taken that moment more seriously than I did. I filed it under kid stuff and forgot it for almost 30 years. The day I left for the station 3 hours upstate, I was 26. My car was packed. Opal walked me to the driveway in her housecoat, the gravel loud under both our shoes, and she held my hand longer than a goodbye needs. "I'll come back every month," I told her. "First Sunday. I promise." She nodded, but she didn't let go. Her grip tightened, thin fingers cool over mine, and she pulled me down close to her mouth like she was about to tell me the weather. "Sable," she said. "If you ever hear something bad about me, if someone tells you I said a thing or did a thing, you don't believe a single soul but me. You hear? Not the family. Not anybody. You come, and you ask me myself. I laughed a little. I thought it was just the kind of thing old women say. I kissed her cheek and told her nobody was ever going to say anything bad about her, and I got in my car and drove. I had no idea she'd already started to be afraid. For the first 3 months, everything was ordinary. I called every Sunday at 7. Grandma Opal would pick up on the second ring and complain that the weather girl on my station couldn't read a warm front to save her life, and I'd tell her that weather girl was me, and she'd laugh like it was the first time she'd made the joke. Then the calls started going to voicemail. The fourth Sunday, Marlowe answered. My cousin's voice was bright and smooth, the way a countertop is smooth right after someone wipes it down. She's sleeping, Sable. She had a long day. It's 7, I said. She's never asleep at 7. People change when they get old. You'd know that if you were here. I let that sit. Outside my window, the sky over the city was that flat pre-storm gray. I could read like a page. The pressure was dropping. Nobody around me could feel it but me. Tell her I called, I said. Tell her I love her. Sure, Marlowe said, and hung up before I finished. It happened again the next week. And the next. She's resting. She's tired. She's not up to it. Each excuse was a little shorter than the last until they weren't excuses anymore. They were a wall with a voice. I didn't know yet that Grandma was in the next room the whole time. The story arrived before I did. My Aunt Renata called me on a Thursday. From the first syllable, I knew something had already been decided without me. How could you, she said. No hello. How could I what? Drain her savings and just leave. She raised you, Sable. She gave you everything. And you cleaned out her account and drove off to play meteorologist 3 hours away like she was nothing. I stood very still in my kitchen. I set my coffee down without a sound. I have never touched her money. Not $1. Where is this coming from? Marlowe showed us. She's the one down there taking care of her while you're on TV. Then the line clicked. I called back and got a message. The number was no longer accepting my calls. One by one over that weekend, the family blocked me. Cousins. A great uncle. Renata. My phone got quieter than it had ever been. The quiet had a shape, and the shape was Marlowe. Here is the thing they teach you in my line of work. You never trust a single reading. One censor can lie. You confirm against a second source before you put a warning on air, because if you're wrong, people die. So, I did what I've always done. I got in my car at 5 in the morning and I drove the 3 hours to Haven Ridge to check the source myself. The gravel of Grandma's driveway crunched under my tires the way it had my whole childhood. Same crooked mailbox. Same porch. But there was a new SUV parked where her old sedan used to sit. Silver. Still wearing the dealer frame. Marlowe came out before I reached the steps. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, filling it, and she was smiling. You can't be here, she said. I want to see Grandma. Right now. She doesn't want to see you. You upset her. She pulled her phone from her back pocket and held it up between us, screen glowing. You take one more step onto this porch, and I'm calling the sheriff. I'll tell them exactly what you are. A grown woman harassing a sick old lady she already robbed. They'll believe me. Everybody believes me. And that was true. That was the worst part. Everybody believed her. I looked past her shoulder, into the dark of the house, and that's when I saw Grandma. She was at the side window, one hand flat against the glass. Her mouth moved around my name. Her eyes weren't confused. Her eyes were terrified. I had 1 full second of her face. Then a second hand came out of the shadow and closed on her arm and drew her back, gently, the way you'd guide something breakable. The curtain fell across the window. Grandma. I got 1 foot on the step. Sheriff's on speed dial. Marlowe said, thumb hovering. Not angry. Enjoying it. I stopped. If they arrested me, I'd never get near that house again. I understood it in the cold, clear way I understand a radar loop. I backed down the steps with my hands where she could see them. I got in my car. I drove out slow over the same gravel, and in the mirror I watched her stand in the doorway until I turned onto the road. I made it 4 miles before I had to pull onto the shoulder because my hands wouldn't hold the wheel steady. That's when my phone buzzed against the dash. A number I didn't know. I turned it over. The message read, "Is this Sable? Your grandmother asked me to bring you this." I pulled onto the gravel shoulder outside Haven Ridge, past the grain elevator, and typed back one word.
Who?
The 3 dots pulsed for a long time. Then, "My name is Delphine Voss. I live next to Opal. Can you come to my back porch?" Not the front. I looked at the dashboard clock. 6:52. If I turned around now, I'd be at the station by 10, 3 hours of dark highway between me and my own desk. Instead, I put the truck in drive and went the back way, along the ditch road, headlights catching the fence posts one by one. Delphine's house sat behind a hedge of overgrown lilac. A woman was already on the porch when I killed the engine, a cardigan pulled tight, a flashlight in one hand though the sky still held a little gray light. She was small, 70 or so. She didn't wave. She just watched me come up the steps like she was making sure I was who she'd been told.
You have her chin, she said. Seat.
The porch boards were cold through my jeans. She lowered herself into a metal chair that scraped against the wood, and she reached into a canvas tote and took out an envelope. It was thick, thicker than a single sheet. The paper felt soft at the corners, like it had been handled and put away and handled again. "She pushed this through the fence to me," Delphine said. "Down at the back, by the compost, where the slats are broke." She waited until the girl went to town. She could barely get her fingers through. I held the envelope and didn't open it. "The girl," I said. "You mean Marlowe?" "I mean Marlowe." Delphine's mouth went flat. "She takes the mail. She takes the phone. Opal isn't allowed the little garden anymore. I used to see her out at 7 every morning, 40 years, deadheading her roses." She nodded toward the hedge. "I haven't seen her outside in 11 weeks. I opened it there on the porch because I could not. The handwriting was my grandmother's, but wrong. The loops shaky, the line drifting downhill like she'd written it fast or cold. "I'm sorry," it began. "I'm sorry I let them think a bad thing about you. She has my card and my checkbook, and she says it's for my own good." She unplugs the phone. "If you call, it only rings in her hand. Please don't believe what they say," I said. "I never said any of it." I read it twice. Then I set it face down on my knee and looked out at the dark field. "I want to call the sheriff," I said. My voice came out even. "Tonight. Right now." Delphine didn't argue right away. She let me sit with it. That's the thing I remember. She let me want it fully before she took it apart. "She has a paper," Delphine said finally. "Power of attorney. Got Opal to sign it 8, 9 months back when Opal's hip was bad and she was on the pills. Every family you got has been told the same story about you, and they believe it because Marlowe's the one who's there. You show up with a letter, they'll say a confused old woman wrote it. Or they'll say you wrote it." She looked at me steadily. "The sheriff here plays cards with her husband's father. Elton's people go back 100 years in this county. You're the one who left at 26 and never came home." The lilac moved in a small wind, and I could smell it, sweet and rotting at the same time. Across the fence, a light went off in an upstairs window. I found myself counting the seconds, the way I count the gap between lightning and thunder, as if I could measure how close the danger was by when the dark arrived. "So I do nothing," I said. "You do the slow thing." Delphine reached over and, without asking, turned the letter face up again, tapped the date my grandmother had written in the corner. "She wants to send you one every month. When Marlowe's in town, I'll bring them to you or mail them if it comes to that. You keep every one. You keep the envelope, the postmark, all of it. You don't throw away a single scrap." She paused. "I'm 71. I'll say what I saw to anybody who'll swear me in. But a stack of letters over time, that's a harder thing to call a fluke." I understood her then. I read Weather the same way. One bad reading is noise. 100 readings in a row is a storm you can name. I told her yes. I bought a fireproof box the next week, and I labeled the first envelope in pencil, and I photographed the letter front and back before I ever filed it. Number 1. They came. 1 a month, sometimes 2. Over the years there would be 41 of them, and I would learn my grandmother's fear by the slant of her hand. But that first night, before I left, Delphine caught my sleeve and pressed a second, newer envelope into my palm. "This came Thursday," she said. "Read it in the truck. Not here." I did. It was 3 lines. The last one made my hand go cold against the wheel. "I've started writing it down," she wrote. "Every dollar." The lawyer's office in Haven Ridge had a fern in the window that needed water, and I remember thinking about that instead of the money. Priya Okafor had a paralegal then, a young man who kept refilling a cup of coffee I never touched. I'd driven the 3 hours again, but this time I had a folder. 9 letters, photocopied, pulled from a stack of 41 my grandmother had smuggled out to me one Sunday at a time. Her handwriting sloped downhill on every page. "Visitation," Priya said. "We petition for the right to see her. Supervised, if we have to. That's the door we go through first." "And the letters?" She turned one over with a single finger, the way you'd turn a leaf to check the underside for rot. "They help. They establish her wishes. Her state of mind." She paused. "If her state of mind holds up." I didn't understand the sentence yet. I would. We filed on a Tuesday. By Friday, Marlowe's attorney sent back a single document, and Priya called me before I'd even parked at the station. I sat in the lot with the engine running and the wipers off in the rain because I wanted to hear every word without the noise. "They had her evaluated," Priya said. 3 weeks ago. A physician's letter. It says Opal Wren presents with progressive cognitive decline, confusion, disorientation. It says, a small rustle of paper on her end, that her statements are not reliable indicators of intent. I watched the rain come apart on the windshield. She's not confused. She's scared. Those aren't the same thing. I know that. But a judge doesn't meet her. A judge meets this letter. So the letters I have become the letters of a confused woman, Priya said gently, which was worse than if she'd said it flat. Anything in her hand, from this date forward, can be waved away. And anything before it, they'll argue she was already slipping. I said thank you. I hung up. I sat there until the rain stopped, and then I drove into work and told a whole county exactly where a cold front would cross the interstate at 4:15, and I was right about that, and it did nothing for the thing pressing on my sternum. Here is what I understood that night, at my kitchen table, with the fireproof box open and 9 letters fanned out under the lamp. My grandmother's voice was real, but real wasn't the same as usable. They had built a wall around her word. Every honest thing she'd risked to smuggle out to me now weighed exactly nothing in the only room that mattered. I needed something that couldn't be called confused. I needed a date and a number stamped by a stranger. I needed paper that wasn't hers. I didn't sleep. I made a list of the things I couldn't get. The call came 9 days later, at 10:40 on a Sunday, the same hour I used to phone the house. I saw the name and let it ring twice before I answered, because Renata Wren had not spoken a civil word to me in almost a year. She was the one who'd called me a leech at Christmas. She was the aunt who'd blocked me first. "It's Renata," she said, as if I would know. Her voice had a scrape in it. "Are you sitting down?" "I'm standing." Fine. A long breath. "I was at the house today. Marlowe's house. Your grandmother's house." She corrected herself twice, and I let her. "There's a new truck in the drive. A big one. Chrome. And the porch has new railings, and there's a contractor's sign in the yard. Kitchen remodel." "Okay," I said, careful, keeping my hands still on the counter. "And your grandmother," Renata went on, "was sitting in the front room in a sweater I gave her 9 years ago, with a hole in the elbow. The house was so cold, I could see my breath in the hall. I asked Marlowe why the heat was off, and she said Grandma likes it cool." She stopped. Sable, she was shivering. She had her hands tucked under her legs to keep them warm. I didn't say the thing I wanted to say, which was, "I know, I've known for months. Where were you?" I set that down. "You do not chase away the first person to walk toward you." "Why are you telling me?" I said instead. "Because it doesn't add up." And now I heard the other thing under her voice, the thing that had actually turned her. Because 2 years ago, Marlo borrowed $11,000 off me for a roof and never paid back a dime, and swore she was broke. And now she's driving a $50,000 truck. Broke people don't do that. Broke people who are broke honestly don't do that. So that was the door. Not love.
A debt.
I didn't care what opened it. I don't have proof, Renata said. I have a bad feeling and a truck. A feeling isn't nothing, I told her. Keep it. There was a silence then, and I could hear her deciding something, the way you hear ice settle in a glass. When she spoke again, she dropped her voice, though she was alone in her own car. Listen to me. Elton, Marlo's husband, he works at the bank. I think he knows more than he lets on. And I think he's scared. The call ended before I could ask what she meant. I set the phone on the counter and stood there while the ice maker dropped a fresh tray with a sound like small bones. I didn't call her back. Some doors you let stay open a crack. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, I learned my grandmother had been dead for 11 days. I found out from a stranger. A woman named Carol at the Haven Ridge Gazette answered when I called about a classified, and she said, "Oh, honey, are you related to the Wren who passed? The obituary ran last week. Beautiful service, packed church." I held the phone against my ear and watched a squall line crawl across my monitor at work, green turning to red over the coast, and I could not make my mouth work for a full 10 seconds. "Which Wren?" I said finally. "Opal, 84. The granddaughter did such a lovely eulogy." I drove the 3 hours that night. I don't remember the drive. I remember the last exit, the grain elevator against a bruised sky, and the fact that the diesel gauge said a quarter tank, and I never once thought to stop. The cemetery gate at St. Brice was chained but not locked. I've climbed worse in worse weather. My phone light found the fresh plot by the turned earth. No grass yet, and the headstone already set, which costs extra to rush. Granite. Expensive granite. I ran my thumb along the letters, because I needed to feel them to believe them. Opal Wren, beloved. And under that, smaller. In loving memory from Marlo Wren, her only devoted grandchild. Only devoted grandchild. I read it twice. Then I set my knees down in the wet dirt and stayed there. She'd have hated the granite. I didn't jump. I think part of me had been waiting for that voice. Delphine Voss stood at the edge of the plot in a man's canvas coat, a flashlight pointed at the ground so it wouldn't blind me. 71, and out at a cemetery past midnight. She wanted the plain limestone, Delphine said. The kind that goes soft and grows moss. She told me. Nobody asked me. Nobody asked me either, I said. Delphine came and lowered herself onto the little stone bench with the care of a woman who knows which knee will fail first. She had a bag with her, an old cloth grocery sack, and she held it in both hands like it was warm. "She gave me this 3 weeks before," she said. "Made me swear I'd only put it in your hands. Not mail it. Not leave it. Your hands." She held it out. "Your hands, Sable." Inside was a notebook. Cloth cover. Faded blue. The corners furred soft from handling. A rubber band held it closed, and the rubber band had gone brittle and snapped when I touched it. I opened it under Delphine's flashlight, and my grandmother's handwriting climbed the page. Not the shaky script from the letters. This was her careful hand, the schoolteacher hand, done slow. Dates down the left margin. Amounts. A word or two for each. March 3rd, $2,200. New transmission for M's car. She took my card. April 19th, $6,000. Roof, she said. No one came to fix a roof. June 2nd, $400 cash. Every Monday after that, another $400, a small neat column of Mondays marching down the page for a year. I turned the page. And another. It didn't stop. 3 years of it. A withdrawal here for a medical bill I knew she never had because I'd have paid it myself and begged to. A line that just said, "She sold Grandpa's rifle. $900. Did not ask." Near the back, in a different pen, pressed hard. Total gone. Best I can count. Over $180,000. I stopped being able to count in April. 187,000. When I added it later, at my kitchen table, At 2 in the morning, with a calculator and a bottle of water I never opened. But she'd rounded it down. Even robbed, my grandmother rounded in Marlowe's favor, because she could not fully believe it of the child she'd fed. She counted, I said. My voice came out level. That surprised me. The whole time. She sat in that cold house and she counted. She wasn't confused. Whatever paper they got, Delphine said. She was the least confused person in that county. I closed the notebook. Then I opened it again because there was one more thing, and I'd almost missed it. The very last page at the bottom, alone. The careful hand was gone here. This was the shaking hand, the letter hand, and it had pressed so hard in 2 places the pen tore the paper. For short lines. The house is Sable's. I signed a different paper. Delphine knows where. I looked up. Delphine was already nodding, slow, like she'd been waiting 11 days for me to reach that page. The call came in at 4:03 in the morning. Not from a person. From the buoy array 40 miles off the coast, a string of numbers I'd been watching drift the wrong direction for 2 days. I sat in the dark of my apartment 3 hours from Haven Ridge and read the pressure again. 941 millibars. Falling. I set my coffee down without drinking it. By 6 I was at the station. By 7 I was on air, and I did not leave that chair for 30 hours. People think forecasting is guessing. It isn't. It's refusing to look away. I stood at the wall map with a marker, and I told the county what the water was going to do before the water knew it. This is not a rain event. I said into the camera, slow, the way Opal taught me to say true things. If you are east of the grain elevator, you leave tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. The emergency manager pushed back. He wanted to wait for the noon model. I told him the noon model would be a body count. I gave him the ditch road, the low bridges, the trailer park by the elevator, street by street, because I had driven every one of them as a child in Opal's truck. He signed the evacuation order at 9:15 that night. 212 people slept in the high school gym who would otherwise have slept in 6 feet of water. The storm came ashore at 3:40 the next afternoon. I watched it on radar, and I watched it out the window at the same time, and for one moment the 2 pictures were the same green, and I could not tell which was real. My hands did not shake. I read the wind field out loud. I named the streets going under. One of them was hers. The house at the edge of Haven Ridge, the house where I learned to read clouds, the house Marlowe lived in now, took water to the eaves. I knew because a viewer sent the station a photo, a phone held above brown water, and there was the roofline I'd fallen asleep under for 20 years, just the top shingles and the weather vane Opal and I had bolted down one August. I looked at it for exactly as long as I let myself. Then I went back to the map. Nobody died. Not one. The paper ran that number on the front page in 72-point type. 0. They wanted to thank me for it. The station manager caught me by the vending machines when it was over, when I'd been awake so long the fluorescent lights had a sound. The county's doing a relief telethon, she said.
Live.
Friday. Raising money for the families who lost everything.
She paused.
We want you on stage, Sable. You're the reason there are families left to raise money for. I said yes because I was too tired to say the real thing, which was that I did not want a stage. I wanted a grave I could stand at without a fence around it. Here is what I did not know yet. A stage is a door that swings both ways. That week I wrote something to say. Not about the storm. About her. I wrote it in the little vinyl notebook I keep for on-air notes, and I crossed most of it out, and what was left was 3 sentences about a woman who taught a scared 6-year-old that the sky always tells you the truth first, if you're willing to be the one who says it out loud. I planned to hold up nothing. No letters.
No leer.
Just her name, said kindly, in front of the whole county. I should have known Marlowe was writing something too. Delphine called me Thursday. Her voice was careful the way it gets when she's afraid of me overreacting. She's on the donor list, Delphine said. Marlowe. She RSVP'd. She asked the organizers if there'd be an open microphone for the family of the honoree. A silence. Sable. Why would she want a microphone? I already knew why. For 3 years Marlowe had told the county one story about me, that I was the one who drained Opal dry. Now the county was about to hand me a crown on live television, and a crown is a hard thing to argue with later, in a courtroom, over an estate. She wasn't coming to thank me. She was coming to poison the water before I could drink it. Get to the microphone first. Say the number. She'd inflated the real 187,000 into some monstrous six-figure lie, while 10,000 people watched, so that anything I produced afterward would sound like a thief's excuse.
I sat with that.
I did not feel afraid. I felt the specific calm of a low-pressure center, the eye, where everything is still because everything around it is moving at 100 miles an hour. Friday night. Backstage. Cables taped to a plywood floor, someone's warm hairspray, the muffled roar of the crowd through the curtain. A stagehand held up 5 fingers. My phone lit up on the counter. Elton. Don't show the letters yet. If you do, you lose. Meet me after the broadcast. I have what you need. The station green room smelled like burnt coffee and hairspray. I read Elton's message once, then slid the phone into my blazer pocket and looked at the index cards in my lap. 6 lines about my grandmother. 6 lines about the woman who taught me that a green sky means hail, that still air before wind means run. I did not tell anyone about the letters. Not the producer clipping the mic to my collar. Not the intern counting me down. The fireproof box was in my trunk in the parking lot, 41 letters and a cloth notebook, and I had promised myself I would not open my mouth about any of it until Priya said the numbers were locked. 2 minutes, the intern said. Out in the studio, the county had come. Folding chairs, wet coats, a donation total ticking up on the screen behind the anchor desk. Half the town had lost a roof. Nobody had lost a life. That was the line they kept saying about me. Nobody died. They called my name, and I walked out into the heat of the lights. The applause was longer than I expected. I found Renata in the 3rd row, not clapping, just watching. I found Delphine near the aisle, her purse held with both hands like it might run. I did not find Marlowe. That should have told me something. 30 hours ago, I started, I was reading a radar loop most of you never saw. But the person who taught me to read a sky never touched a radar in her life. I told them about Opal on the back porch. About the summer she pointed at a wall of cloud over the grain elevator and said, "That one's going to lie to you. Watch the bottom of it." About how she was right, and the calm broke into the worst hail Haven Ridge had in a decade. She taught me to never trust a pretty surface, I said. To always check the source. I meant it as a tribute. I did not know yet how much I would need to live by it before the night was over. That was when the chair scraped. Stone floor, metal legs, a long, ugly sound. Marlowe stood up in the front row with a cordless mic already in her hand. She had asked the station for a family moment, and they had given her one. Because who says no to grief? "I'm sorry," she said, sweet, to the whole county. I can't sit here and let this happen." The anchor half rose. Marlowe turned her back on him and faced me. "You want to talk about Grandma?" Her voice did not shake. That was the part one remember. It did not shake at all. "You emptied her. $600,000 of her savings gone. And then you drove 3 hours away and let her die alone while I changed her sheets. And now you're up there in makeup being called a hero." 600,000. The number in the notebook was 187. She had rounded my grandmother's whole life up into a lie big enough to fill a room. The room filled with it. I heard it happen. Not a gasp, worse. A settling. Chairs creaking as people leaned toward the version that was easier to believe. Renata's face went white and closed. Somewhere in the back, my mother's cousin said, out loud, "I knew it." My hand was already in my pocket. I could feel the corner of my phone and past it in my mind, the box in the trunk. 41 letters in her handwriting. I could walk off the stage, carry the box back in, and open it on live television. I could read one aloud right now in her voice and watch Marlowe's face come apart. And Elton's text sat in my pocket like a stone. "Don't release them." And Priya, 3 days ago, across her desk, tapping the doctor's form with one finger. "If you go public before we have bank records with third-party dates," her lawyer stands up and says the old woman was demented. The letters prove nothing. It's stamped on a form dated 3 weeks before she died. You'll have spent your only shot in a room full of strangers. The letters would not win here. They would drown here. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done on camera. I stood still. Marlo waited. She wanted me to cry or shout or reach for the letters. She was watching my hands. I let go of my pocket. I set both hands flat on the podium, palms down on the warm wood, and I felt my own pulse in them. I'm not going to argue with you in front of people who lost their homes this week, I said. My voice came out level. It surprised me. This isn't the place. Of course you'd say that. She smiled at the camera. There's nothing to argue with. I looked at her, then at the lens, the little red light, the county behind it. Next week, I said, at the law office. The truth is going to speak for itself. I won't have to. I stepped back from the mic. That was all. I did not explain what I meant. I let the sentence hang there and do its slow work. One open door I was not going to walk through yet. Marlo's smile widened, because to her it looked like a retreat. She thought I had nothing. She turned to the anchor and murmured something about family being complicated, and the total kept ticking up behind us, and they cut to a commercial. I walked off the far side of the stage, past the burnt coffee, out the fire door into the lot. The rain had stopped. The asphalt was black and shining under a single sodium light, and my breath showed. A figure stepped out from between two cars. Elton. In a bank cardigan of all things, hands trembling so badly the little device in his palm rattled against his ring. 3 years of statements, he said. I printed what I could pull. It's all on here. He pressed the USB into my hand, warm from his grip. But there's one thing on it you're not going to like. He swallowed. There's a transfer with your name on it. The lot smelled like wet asphalt and diesel from the generator trucks the station had rolled in for the telethon. Elton stood between two of them, half in shadow, the USB still warm from his palm. How much? I said. 40,000.
He wouldn't look at me.
Opened in your name. 2 years ago. The deposits came straight out of Opal's money market account. I turned the little drive over in my fingers.
Plastic. Cheap.
Heavier than it had any right to be. I never opened an account, I said. I know. He finally met my eyes. That's the whole point. Marlo did. She had your social, your old license number, that address from before you moved. She said if anyone ever came asking, the paper would already say Sable took the money. A truck idled and shuddered. She's been building this since before your grandmother died. I drove the 3 hours back to the station with the heater off because I needed to stay sharp, and cold was sharp. Somewhere past the grain elevator, I pulled onto the ditch road and sat with the hazards ticking. $40,000 with my name stapled to it. Marlo hadn't invented a lie out of nothing. She'd built a scaffold and hung my name on the front of it, and every relative who'd cursed me had been reading a real document. Here is what she didn't account for. I've spent 17 years being told a storm is one thing when the data says it's another. You don't argue with the sky. You timestamp it. Priya's office at 7 the next morning smelled like burnt coffee and toner. She had the statements printed and fanned across the table like a losing hand of cards. Elton sat across from her, gray, a paper cup shaking faintly in his grip. Here, Priya said, tapping a line. Account in your name. Opened March 11th, 2 years ago, at the Haven Ridge branch. In person. Signature card, and everything. She slid me a photocopy. The signature was a decent forgery. The loop on the S was wrong. March 11th, I said. I opened my laptop. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I pulled the station's archive, the internal one, the one that logs every second I'm on a live feed with a machine-stamped clock nobody can touch after the fact. March 11th, I said again and turned the screen. I was on air. Live cut-in, 2:14 to 2:51 in the afternoon, tornado watch over 3 counties. That's me. That's the lower third with the time burned into it. That's a 3-hour drive from the Haven Ridge branch, and I was here. Priya leaned in. She did not smile, but something in her shoulders dropped an inch. You can't sign a card in person in a bank when you're 3 hours away and live on the air. No, I said. You can't. Elton set the cup down. There's more. She didn't do the walk-in herself. She sent someone with your info. But the bank keeps camera footage 90 days on a rolling loop, he stopped. I know because I work 3 branches over. I can pull the transfer metadata. Not the video, that's gone. But every wire has a machine trail. Origin terminal. Employee ID. It's all still there if someone asks for it in writing. Will you ask? Priya said. Not a question. Elton was quiet a long moment. The generator hum from outside had followed us into the room. Or maybe those just my ears. I watched her buy a $50,000 truck with a woman's grocery money, he said. I balanced the checkbook while Opal wore a coat in her own kitchen. I told myself I didn't know for sure. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. I knew. I'll pull it. I'll sign whatever you want. That was the moment he stopped being Marlowe's husband in the room and became a witness. You could feel the air change, the way it changes 8 minutes before hail. I laid the cloth notebook on the table then. Opal's. The one Delphine had pressed into my hands over her grave, every withdrawal in my grandmother's slanted hand. Date, amount, what Marlowe said it was for. I set it next to Priya's fan statements and slid it toward her. She kept her own books, I said, before I ever had a single bank record. Priya put on her reading glasses. She started at the top of the notebook, then at the top of the printed statement, and she began to walk down both columns with the cap of her pen, one line, one line, one line. The office went silent except for the tick of the pen against paper and Elton's breathing. 14 minutes. I counted them off the clock on the wall because counting is what I do when I can't do anything else. There's one more thing my grandmother wrote, I said, to fill the silence. The last page. She said there was another paper, about the house. Delphine knows where. Priya didn't answer. She had stopped at a line halfway down the notebook and was staring at it, then at the statement, then back. She flipped a page.
Compared.
Flipped again. The pen stopped ticking. She took off her glasses. Sable, she said, very quietly. Your grandmother was not confused. This isn't the notebook of a woman who is losing her mind. Every figure in here matches the bank to the dollar. Every one. She's the most accurate bookkeeper I've ever read. She set the pen down flat. And a woman who kept records like this doesn't forget to sign her own name. She's signed a new deed. We just have to find it. Priya's office had a long table meant for signing things, and by 9 on that Thursday, every chair around it was full. I counted them the way I count cells on a radar loop. Renata by the window. 2 of my father's cousins near the door, arms folded. A notary named Hollis with a stamp and an ink pad set out like small tools. And at the far end, a woman in a gray blazer who had not introduced herself as anything soft. Marnie Sook, she said, when Marlowe finally arrived. Elder Financial Abuse Unit. I'm here to observe. Marlowe set her purse on the table like a claim. Observe what? My cousin's little theater? Sit down, please, Priya said. Not loud. She had a box in front of her, cardboard, and she rested one hand flat on the lid the way you rest a hand on something you don't want to open too fast. I took out the first letter myself. The paper was thin, worn at the fold, and it smelled faintly of the cedar drawer Delphine had kept them in. I read Opal's date at the top. Then I read her words in the room, out loud, in the plainest voice I own. Sable, I am not sick in the head. I want you to know that whatever they tell you later. She takes my card to the machine on Tuesdays. She tells me it is for groceries. I have not seen a grocery in this house. Nobody moved. The clock on Priya's wall had a second hand you could hear. I read the next one. And the one after. 41 of them stacked at my elbow, and I only read 4. But 4 was enough for the room to start breathing differently. In one, Opal described the truck. Not $50,000, she didn't know the number, but the big black one Marlowe parks where I used to keep the wheelbarrow. In another she wrote, I am cold. The furnace is off. She says the bill is my fault.
Those are forged, Marlowe said.
She's a meteorologist. She knows how to fake a document. Postmarks, Priya said, and turned the box towards Sook. Every envelope. 3 years of them, stamped by the Haven Ridge Post Office, sorted by date. You can't forge a cancellation mark backward through a federal system. Then Delphine stood. She is 71, and she stood the way a fence post stands. Opal handed me the first one through the gap in the pickets, she said. Right side, third board down, the loose one. She tapped the board when she had one ready. I have my own copies of every letter I carried, kept in a tin under my sink. I made them the same night, before I mailed the originals, because I was afraid of exactly this day. Marlo laughed, one hard note. It didn't land anywhere. Next was the notebook, the cloth-bound one Delphine gave me at the grave. Priya opened it beside the bank statements, and here she paused and looked to the corner. Mr. Marlowe, you pulled these. Elton had come in late and said nothing till now. He was gray around the mouth. I did, he said, so quiet the notary leaned in. I work at the bank. I watched the transfers go through for 3 years, and I told myself it wasn't mine to stop. He didn't look at his wife. It reconciles. I checked it twice because I hoped I was wrong. Priya read them together, line for line, aloud, the way you check a witness against a fact. March 9th for $1,000, for me, she said, roof. Bank record, March 9th for 1,000, transferred to an account in Marlo Wren's name. April 2nd, 12,000. She cried and said the lawyer needed it. Bank record, same day, same amount. She kept turning pages. It reconciles to the dollar. $187,000 over 3 years. I watched Marlo's face for the exact second the room stopped being hers. It came when Priya said the number, because the number was Opal's number, the one my grandmother had scrawled in a shaking hand in the back of the notebook, guessing at her own losses. Over 180,000, she'd written, and been almost right. That's the account she stole, Marlo tried. There's 40,000 in Sable's name. Open the same afternoon she was live on air, 3 hours from that bank, Priya said. The station's broadcast is time-stamped. Ms. Sook already has a copy. She didn't even look up. Sook was writing. There was one thing left, and I hadn't touched it because I hadn't seen it until that morning. Delphine reached into her coat and set a long envelope on the table, sealed, the flap thick. Opal gave me a key, she said, to the safe box at Redeemer Methodist where she used to do the flowers. Told me it held the paper that mattered most, and I wasn't to open it till she was gone, and you were all in one room. She slid it to Priya. Priya broke the seal with a letter opener.
Slow.
She read the header, then read it again, then handed it to Hollis the notary, who checked the signatures against his own logbook and nodded once. A new deed, Priya said. The house on Ditch Road and the remaining accounts, to Sable Wren. Witnessed and notarized. She let the date sit in the air. Signed 6 weeks before the physician's letter that called her incompetent. She was legally sound when she signed this. That letter came after. Marlo was on her feet. That's a lie. She was confused. She didn't know. She knew the loose board. Delphine said quietly. Third one down. I did not gloat. I want to be clear about that because I had imagined this moment for 3 years, and in every version I said something sharp. Instead, I looked at the stack of 41 letters, and I thought about how long my grandmother had spent making sure her voice would still be in a room she'd never sit in. My hands were steady. I folded the first letter back along its worn crease and set it down. Next week, Priya said, I filed to reopen the whole estate. Every dollar. Sook closed her folder. It made a small, final sound like a drawer. She turned to Marlo, and her voice was not raised at all. You will not manage this estate for 1 more day, she said. And you should call your own attorney. Renata pushed her chair back. The legs scraped the floor, loud in the quiet, and she stood, and she looked at Marlo for a long moment. The niece she'd defended, the truck she'd noticed, the $11,000 she'd never gotten back. Then she turned her shoulders square away and faced the window instead. The investigator's name was Hollis, and she wore a gray blazer with a pen clipped to the collar, and she called me on a Tuesday morning while I was rinsing a coffee cup at my sink 3 hours away. Ms. Wren, she said. The county attorney reviewed the file. I want you to hear it from me before it's in the paper. I turned off the water. I set the cup upside down on the rack. I said, Go ahead. We're opening a criminal case. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. There will be a restitution order. And there will very likely be charges. I looked out the window over the sink. The sky was flat and white, no weather in it at all, the kind of sky that tells you nothing. How much? I said. The forensic accountant put the traceable figure at $187,000, Hollis said. Which matches the notebook almost to the dollar. I've been doing this 11 years. I've never seen a victim keep records that clean. She wasn't confused, I said. No, Hollis said. She was the most careful witness in the room, and she'd been dead 9 weeks. They came for the truck first. I wasn't there, but Delphine called me from her porch. I could hear her screen door creak as she pushed it open to see better. There's a flatbed backing into the drive. Sable, she whispered, as if Marlowe might hear her over the yard. 8:15 in the morning. 2 men in work gloves. She narrated it live. The winch cable going taut. The $50,000 truck rising off its tires. Marlowe on the steps in a bathrobe with her arms crossed, saying nothing. She's just watching, Delphine said. Same as she watched your grandmother. The granite countertops came out the following week. The new water heater. The riding mower. Everything the notebook had a line for, the county had a lien for. By the end, Delphine told me, the house looked the way it had looked when Opal lived in it. Cold and stripped and quiet. Elton filed for legal separation the same month. The papers listed him, in the county's language, as the reporting party. He'd been the one to pull the metadata, the one who'd handed me the USB in a parking lot with his hands shaking, and now his name sat in a public record as the man who turned in his own wife. He called me once. He said, I should have done it 3 years ago. I didn't tell him it was fine because it wasn't, and he knew that better than I did. I said, you did it. That's the part that counts now. He was quiet a long time. Then he said thank you, and hung up, and I never heard from him again. The family split the way a board splits when you drive a wedge in it, clean along the grain in some places, splintered and ugly in others. Renata drove 3 hours to sit at my kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the wood and looked at them and said, I called you a name I won't repeat. I believed a woman who owed me $11,000 over a woman who never asked me for a dime. She'd rehearsed it. I could tell. I let her finish. Then I made her a cup of coffee, because that is what Opal would have done, and because being right had never once tasted the way I'd imagined it would. Others said nothing. Cousins who'd blocked my number simply unblocked it and never wrote. An uncle passed me in the grocery store in Haven Ridge and studied the shelf of canned beans as if it held a secret. I understood. Apology means admitting you were the kind of person who believed the easy story. Most people would rather move a house than say that sentence out loud. The paper ran it on a Thursday. Storm hero cleared. Cousin faces charges in elder case. There was a photo of me from the telethon, mid-word, one hand raised toward a radar loop. There was a smaller photo, farther down, of Opal at 80, squinting up at a sky I couldn't see. Someone quoted me. I'd told the reporter one true thing and she'd printed it whole. I'm not angry that she took the money. I'm angry about what she did with my grandmother's last 3 years. The cold house, the sweater with the hole in it, the 11 weeks she never got to stand in her own garden. You can pay back $187,000. You cannot pay back a spring. Then the county released the seized property back to the estate, and the estate was mine, and a sheriff's clerk named Marnie Sook called to say I could pick up a box of personal effects that hadn't been part of the lien, things too worn to sell. The box was cardboard, taped once, my grandmother's name written on the side in a stranger's block letters. I brought it home. I didn't open it for 2 days. When I did, it was mostly what you'd expect, reading glasses, a church bulletin, a tin of buttons. And at the bottom, under a folded apron that still smelled faintly of her kitchen, was a single brass key on a loop of green yarn. The key to the timber house. The one on the edge of Haven Ridge where she taught me the sky. Folded around it, held with the same green yarn, was a scrap of paper in her hand. The real hand, the steady one, from before the trembling. For lines. She must have wrapped it years ago, and left it where only a careful person would think to look. I read it once. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and read it again. Don't keep it for yourself. You know what to do with the sky. The county gave the storm center a grant. I turned it down. I used the house instead. The morning we cut the ribbon, the sky over Haven Ridge was the color of wet slate, and I knew before the radar loaded that we had 11 days before the first real system of the season. I stood on the porch where Opal used to sit and read the horizon. I watched Delphine kneel in the side garden, pressing tomato starts into the black soil with her thumbs. She grew these along the fence, Delphine said, not looking up, so I could see them when I hung my washing. I hadn't known that. 41 letters, and she never once told me the tomatoes were a signal. Inside, Elton had set up a folding table by the window. 2 ledgers lay open, one for donations, one for expenses. Every dollar that came through the Opal Wren Storm Center got a line, a date, a name. He'd asked to do the books himself. He said it quietly, the way you ask for a thing you don't think you deserve. I want every number in this house to be true, he said. For once. I let him. Renata worked the folding chairs, snapping them open in rows for the county kids we'd invited. She wouldn't meet my eyes for the first hour. Then, near 10, she came and stood beside me at the radar console and set a ring of keys on the desk. House keys. Marlowe's. The court released them to next of kin, she said. I'm not next of kin to this house. You are. I looked at the keys and didn't touch them.
Keep them, I said.
Your staff now. Her mouth did something it hadn't done in 3 years. She turned away before I could name it. At noon we went live. Not the station's cameras, ours. A single feed from the front room of a cabin at the edge of Haven Ridge, running on a used transmitter and a 50-foot mast Elton had bolted to the chimney the week before. I sat where my grandmother taught me to sit. On the wall behind me hung the cloth-covered notebook, framed now, open to a page nobody would ever read on air. The siren we'd mounted on the ridge could reach every farm in the county for free. 12 children sat in Renata's folding chairs. I didn't start with the storm. I started with the sky. Cumulus means fair, I told them, pointing out the window at the flat-bottomed clouds stacking over the grain elevator. But when the bottoms go dark and the tops climb like cauliflower, that's the sky telling you to go home. My grandmother taught me that when I was 6 years old, in this room, at that window. She said the sky always tells the truth.
People lie.
Weather doesn't. A boy in the front row asked how she knew so much. She read it every day for 84 years, I said. And she wrote things down. She believed if you wrote the truth down and kept it somewhere safe, it would find its way to the person who needed it. Even years later. Even after you were gone. I didn't explain what I meant. They were 9. But Delphine, standing in the doorway with soil on her knees, went very still. Here is the thing I understand now that I did not understand at 26, the year I left home. Silence does not protect the innocent. It never did. For 3 years I told myself that staying quiet, keeping the letters in a fireproof box, that was the noble thing. It wasn't noble. It was survivable. The letters didn't save her. They only spoke after. And a voice that only speaks after is a eulogy, not a rescue. So we build a place that speaks before. That's what a storm warning is. It's a voice that reaches you while there's still time to move. After the broadcast, I walked the kids out to the ridge and let each of them press the test button on the siren. The sound rolled across the fields and came back off the far tree line a half-second late, like an echo of a voice that had finally arrived where it was needed. Delphine handed me a tomato, still warm from the vine.
First of the season, she said.
I ate it on the porch, standing where Opal stood, watching the dark bottoms of the clouds begin to climb. The county calls me the storm hunter. My grandmother taught me to read a sky, and then she taught me the harder thing, that the truth is patient, and it does not need you to shout. It only needs you to write it down, keep it safe, and give it somewhere to land. She gave me a sky. I gave it back to everyone.